All right, this is for political science. This is going to be for Thursday, March 26th. Today we're going to look at the very interesting case of Masterpiece Cake Shop versus the Colorado Civil Rights Commission. And this is what I call a double liberty case. Because you have two people expressing some sort of liberty or right, and basically they're asking the government, who's right in this situation. We have religious liberty, and then we have equal rights for same-sex couples. So, in this case, Masterpiece Cake Shop, it's a cake shop in Colorado. Jack Phillips is the owner. He's a Christian. He designs many different types of cakes and whatever. But he does not make cakes that go against his religious beliefs. He's refused Halloween cakes. He's refused cakes that, glorify alcohol. He also believes that marriage is between one man and one woman. So he is, not willing to make cakes that are for same-sex weddings, basically what it comes down to. And so there's a couple that came asking to have a cake made, and he said, look, I don't do same-sex wedding cakes. I'd be happy to give you a plain cake that's already been made, and then you can add to it. But he said, I'm not going to create a message that goes against my deeply held religious beliefs. And so after he refused to make him the cake, the couple took their complaint to the Colorado Civil Rights Commission, stating that Jack Phillips was not following public accommodation laws. Basically, what a public accommodation is that any good that's open to the public, so that's basically any business that's out there, that offers a good to the public, you can't discriminate against someone on the basis of race, religion, disability, on and on and on. So the couple was basically saying, look, he is discriminating against us because we are a same-sex couple. Right? If we were a heterosexual couple, we would get a cake, but because we are a same-sex couple, he is refusing to make this for us. Therefore, this violates Colorado's public accommodation laws. And so the case was taken, the case was taken in front of the Colorado Civil Rights Commission, and they agreed with the couple. They said, yeah, you are violating this law. Very apparent that you're violating this law. And either you have to make same-sex wedding cakes, or your business has to shut down. And so in order to stay afloat as a business and not be violating the ruling by the Colorado Civil Rights Commission, Jack Phillips decided not to make any wedding cakes whatsoever. So he said, I'm just going to say no wedding cakes to anybody. Therefore, you can't say I'm discriminating against same-sex or opposite-sex couples. I'm just not making any wedding cakes whatsoever while this case plays out in the court. So obviously he lost a ton of money by doing that because, obviously bakeries, they make a lot of money off wedding cakes and things like that. So the issue at question is, does the enforcement of Colorado's anti-discrimination law, which requires Masterpiece Cake Shop to create a cake that basically violates, either you could argue is a violation of his free speech to be forced to make a message that he doesn't agree with, or a violation of his free exercise of religion rights under the First Amendment, stating that, you are forcing him to convey a message that goes against his deeply held religious beliefs. So this is what the court was considering. So, sometimes the Supreme Court will issue a ruling that full right answers a question and basically can be used as a precedent for many, many years and on. And sometimes the Supreme Court will do something what I guess Supreme Court pundits will call a punt. And what I mean by that is, instead of ruling on the issue that will then set precedent for the federal courts to follow, they rule on a technicality, or they rule super narrowly to where there's no really precedent set going forward. It's just set on the specifics of this case. Usually they don't do that, but they did that in this case. So instead of deciding, okay, what takes precedent in this case, public accommodation laws or, free exercise of religion, the Supreme Court looked at the specifics of this case. And in a 7-2 decision, so you would think this would, hotly contested case would be 5-4, but because it was ruled on a very, very narrow decision, two of the more liberal justices sided with the more conservative members of the court, and they stated that something known as viewpoint discrimination took place, as well as the Colorado Civil Rights Commission didn't particularly treat his religious views fairly and was not given basically fair due process throughout this whole ruling. So the majority, which was authored by Anthony Kennedy, he basically said that members of the Colorado Civil Rights Commission, there are a couple members that made some comments which were very negative towards his religion, okay? They made comments about like how religion had been a basis for discrimination for centuries, and they, talked about, things that viewed religion in a negative light. And that's not the job of the government, right? The government, if it can't, endorse a religion, it also definitely can't, sit there and pick apart people's religions. And that's what the court said happened in this case right here. It also looked at several other cases where there are individuals who refused to make cakes with messages that they found offensive on them. And they said because there were other cases in Colorado where bakers refused to make cakes that had offensive, views on there, you were not really being viewpoint neutral on this case. You were really just discriminating against the baker because of his religious beliefs instead of treating his case just like all the other cases. And so because they showed what they called hostility towards his religion, his objection was upheld, and in this case, he won. Now, here's the thing about that. This didn't set any precedent. In fact, the next day, it could have happened. This couple could have went back to his shop and asked for the same thing, and they could have went through all this over again. And because the majority did not rule that, that you could not force the baker to make cakes against his religious beliefs, or that he had to make cakes against his religious beliefs. They didn't rule on that whatsoever. They just looked at the narrow specifics of this case, and they said because of the way Colorado basically treated his religious beliefs, he did not have to make the cake in this instance. But it didn't really set rulings for future cases. So this is called ruling narrowly or punting, where you basically, instead of the court answering the larger issue, they kind of squirm and navigate around the issue because either they don't want to be seen the ones, this is obviously a clearly political decision, so they don't want to be seen as the ones making this political decision. But in this decision, it's hard really on either side to claim this as a victory, and really neither could either side really say it was a loss either. I would say really, when you look at this case right here, it's, in the specifics, yes, the baker won, but in the long term, the court really didn't rule. The two dissenting opinions, or justices on the dissenting opinion, Ginsburg and Sotomayor, they disagreed. They said that the commission applied the law differently to the three bakers who refused to make anti-same-sex marriage cakes. They based the fact that the same-sex couple only requested a wedding cake with no message. Phillips would have sold that cake to any heterosexual couple for their wedding, but refused to sell it because they were same-sex. So they're basically saying he refused to make them the cake because they were a same-sex couple. The three bakers who refused to make the cakes because the messages requested were offensive would not have made them if they were same-sex or opposite-sex couples. So they're saying in this instance right here, these two didn't, this baker didn't make the cake basically because he didn't want to participate in a same-sex wedding or make a cake that was used in a same-sex wedding. So one of the implications of this case basically when the court doesn't rule on this issue, it sets no precedent. And so there are tons and tons of cases going throughout the district and appellate courts on both the state and the federal level. Of course, we just saw one here in Kentucky, where you have this question between religious freedom and freedom of speech and the right of same-sex couples to be treated equally as opposite-sex couples. And the court didn't rule on this. It just made a small technicality. So some people are like, why do you take that case? I mean, yeah, it was good for Mr. Phillips, but he has since been sued on other grounds dealing similar to this. So it really didn't solve his problems in the long run. It just solved his problems with this case. And you could really argue it didn't benefit the couple any, because they didn't get the answer that they wanted. And so the court really didn't answer this question. And maybe they're waiting on legislators to answer, but really there could be the same challenges made to laws made in this respect. And there's a very similar case right now. The Supreme Court is considering a petition that was filed known as Arlene Flowers versus the state of Washington, which deals with the same idea. The idea, except it being a couple asking for a cake. A couple asked for this lady, Arlene, to make flowers for their same-sex wedding. She said, look, I don't do same-sex, weddings, but I'll happily, point you in the direction where you can go get those flowers made. And the same thing has basically undertook. And so now it's made its way all the way up to the Supreme Court. So in this case right here, it's a big liberty question case, right? Because either way you rule, right, you could make the argument you're infringing upon someone's rights or liberties, right? Either the baker's free speech or free exercise of religion, his rights, or the couple's right to not be discriminated against. So, I mean, the Supreme Court, when they ultimately decide to answer this once and for all, they're going to make winners and losers out of this. And this is one of the implications, right, of when same-sex marriage was made constitutional across 50 states, that there are going to be questions like this. What do you do with people that have a deeply held religious belief that does not agree with same-sex marriage, but at the same time not, have same-sex couples discriminated against? And so only time will tell on how the case will be answered. Tomorrow we'll kind of continue to look at this case. We'll look at the arguments for each side, and then we'll kind of go from there.